Our next speaker will be Mariela Reyna, and she will, I'm not even going to try to read you her title, but please welcome Mariela.
Hi, so today I'll be talking to you guys about the effects between the interaction of Pseudomonas and glyphosate in cynodont-dactyl germination and growth. So I'd just like to go through an overview of what my presentation will entail. I will start by going over what glyphosate is, then how Roundup is intertwined with it, the effects on animals and on humans, the degradation that it has in the environment, the methods that I used for my presentation, the results, and then we will have a brief discussion of my conclusions and future work that I would like to do, and then there will be some time at the end for questions. So glyphosate inhibits the sugarmate pathway, and the sugarmate pathway is necessary for the formation of aromatic amino acids, which are essential for plant growth. This 7-step pathway is used by bacteria, archaea, fungi, algae, and some protozoans. Here you can see exactly where it comes into the pathway and where it will stop the growth of plants. Based on this, theoretically, glyphosate should not have an effect on humans. But in order to understand this, we must look at how we come in contact with it. So Roundup is one of the most commonly used herbicides today, and you may even use this in your backyard. So it is produced by Monsanto, which is a huge corporation, and they recently just lifted their patent on it, which commercialized it and allowed it to be used in a greater scale. They still have many patents and monopolies on many Roundup-resistant seeds. This gives them a lot of power in the section of food production, and they claim that it will actually be degraded quickly in the soil. So for example, the bottle that I used, which was this one, the back of the bottle says that it will be degraded within 3 days in a normal soil environment. They claim there are also no adverse effects to consumers or the farmers that use it. This claim, however, was put to the test by Dwayne Johnson, a school groundskeeper. So Mr. Johnson sued Monsanto, claiming that continued and repetitive use of Roundup played a part in his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He won the case and was given $289 million in compensation. Mr. Johnson's case made it possible for other claims to go to trial. Currently, there are 800 patients that are suing Monsanto. Now, the next image may be a little graphic, but it shows you exactly what he is claiming is caused. So a new paper supporting evidence is going to be published in New Research. However, there have been already many papers published supporting that Roundup is detrimental to aquatic wildlife and ecosystems, especially when it enters the groundwater. From the groundwater, it can move on to rivers and lakes and affect the vegetation, along with killing various amphibians and fish. However, it has been found that different commercially available products with different formulations have different effects. So this figure is from a study that was done on toads, and here on the x-axis we have different herbicide formulations. So they first started with a control, in which they did not put any herbicide onto these toads. Here on the y-axis we can see percent survival. So for control we expected to have 100% survival since there was nothing being added to them. The white bars are when they were grown on paper towels, and the darker bars are when they were grown in soil. So we do see here a decrease, and that decrease is just something that is due to the medium that they're grown in and not by anything else. So IG is Ignite, which is a competitive to Roundup, so it's a different form of an herbicide that also uses glyphosate, but it isn't produced by Monsanto. WM is Roundup Weather Max. WGKC is Roundup Weed and Grass Killer Super Concentrate, and WGKP is Roundup Weed and Grass Killer Ready to Use Plus. So here we see that there's definitely a significant decrease between these other formulations and this Ready to Use Plus. This is the kind that I decided to use for my research. Also, because they use the difference between paper towel and soil, and in all the other ones we do see a decrease, we can conclude conclude that the soil microbiome had an effect, and so that's something that we also wanted to look into. So toads can be used to make a lot of inferences about the effects that these products have on human health, but let's look at some species that are more similar to us. So this was a study that was done on rats, and the C would be the control rats, and the R would be the rats that have Roundup on them. And we see many significant differences between the cell area, the cytoplasm area, and then when we looked under the microscope, for example, we see that the control had a normal sized nucleus, while the Roundup had a large nucleus, and many other changes within the cell. So these alterations in the nuclear architecture suggest that there was many RNA disturbances, and that's the effect that Roundup is having. They also looked at glyphosate in cow urine and compared it to the amount of urea in the blood serum. So a higher amount of urea would suggest toxicity in the kidneys. And here on the y-axis we have the urea quantified, and on the x-axis the urea is quantified, and on the y-axis would be the glyphosate. And there is definitely a correlation between the two. So with an R value of 0.72, we can conclude that higher glyphosate means higher urea in blood serum, which will lead us to suggest that glyphosate is producing toxicity in the kidneys. So this glyphosate is then shows that it's being stored in plants and then passed on to the organisms that eat the plant. For example, in this case, it was the dairy cows. The next step from these dairy cows would be to us. Now, even if you don't choose to drink milk or eat the meat, more directly, you are ingesting these crops that contain glyphosate. Now, to bring this closer to home in humans, another study found that glyphosate exposure in pregnancy actually shortens the gestational length. So here on the X is the concentration of glyphosate that was found through urine samples, and on the Y we have gestational length. We see a slight decrease as glyphosate concentration increases. This supports the idea that glyphosate disrupts hormone-producing cells. So now that we know that there's many problems with this being in the environment, how do we get rid of this chemical? So glyphosate can be degraded in two separate ways. The first pathway would be turning it into AMPA, and the second would be turning it into glycine. And there's many bacteria that can do this, and specifically Pseudomonas bacteria can do both. And it does that by cleaving the carbon bonds. So in this figure, we see Pseudomonas here on this y-axis. Pseudomonas is growing. On the x-axis, we have time, and on this y-axis, we have concentration of glyphosate and then concentration of the degraded form. So we see that as the Pseudomonas bacteria grows, glyphosate is decreased, and the degraded form of glyphosate is actually increased, suggesting that it is, in fact, degrading it. So Pseudomonas strains have been found to do this, and because of this, I decided to look to see if this could be applied in a greenhouse environment to remediate soil with glyphosate. So my hypothesis was that if I put more Pseudomonas bacteria into the soil, it could degrade glyphosate greater, which means that there would be more plant growth. I wanted to test local Pseudomonas strains that could be applied to crops in the local area without having any other adverse effects. So I needed a model organism in order to do this, and I decided on Cynodon dactyl, which is Bermuda grass. I did this because it grew quickly, it was easy to quantify growth by length and biomass, and it was abundant in the area. It's also a frequent target of Roundup commercially, and is used as hay for cattle. So I retrieved a sample of the grass from St. Edward's University, and I inoculated the roots in an herbicide broth for 1 hour. I then removed the roots and incubated it for 24 hours. After this, an aliquot was stripped onto Pseudomonas agarically. So this means that this medium would only grow Pseudomonas bacteria. I came up with 2 different strains. I decided to use this clear strain. I then needed to identify it under the microscope. And so here's a picture of that. You can see that they were gram-negative bacteria because of the pink rods. I then created a pure culture of this, and this is the broth that I used on my plants. So because the soil microbiome is very dependent on plants growing in the soil and dynamically intertwined with their roots and their life stages. To account for this, I wanted to look at established plants with roots and plants that didn't have roots, which would be seeds. To do this, I first grew Bermuda grass in these pots and without any excess bacteria or any herbicide. I came up to a difference between these boxes. So here we see there should be no difference between the two, but this one has less grass than this one. And that might have just been due to where I had placed them in the greenhouse and the amount of light that they had gotten. So to account for this, I randomly chose grass from this pot, these pots, and these pots, and then transferred that onto my actual experiment, which were these pots in the back. So I put 4 experimental groups, and my first experimental group had Roundup and bacteria. The second just had Roundup. The second just had bacteria, sorry. The third only had Roundup, and the fourth was a control that had no Roundup or bacteria. So in my results, I found that for the mature plants, there was a significant difference between the groups because I got a significantly small p-value. And here we see that the Roundup plants that only had Roundup had no growth, but yet those that had Roundup and bacteria, although slight, they did have an average plant length that was higher than 0, and they did have a biomass. So when we looked at the seeds, there was also a significant difference between all the groups, but for Roundup and Roundup with bacteria, both of those had no growth at all, and the seeds did not even germinate. So there was no plant length and no biomass at all. I then wanted to make sure, and I looked at the control versus the bacteria to see if there was a difference between those two, and there actually wasn't a significant difference between those two. So of course, with all of science, there's still far more to go. And there are many other avenues into which I would like to continue this research. And I would like to acknowledge and thank my mentor, Dr. Quinn, for helping and supporting me through my thesis. Dr. Berlinski for helping me through my bacterial methods and cultivation. The CCD who helped me in the greenhouse. And Honors Program for funding and supporting my thesis.
We have time for a few questions.
Yes.
Swear to God, this is not a planned question. Can you go back about the black and white slides to show the results, please? Yeah, that one. So I understand what you're saying. The Roundup by the second line down, Roundup by itself pretty much knocked them out. The Roundup, the third line down, the Roundup and the bacteria kind of offset the impact of the Roundup, correct?
Yes.
Next slide. That was with mature plants. Next slide. Do we have any idea why seedlings, young plants, not mature plants, are more susceptible, appear to be more susceptible even when you put the bacteria on? The bacteria don't seem to save them as well. You see what I'm saying? Any idea what's going on that's different in the mature plants and the relatively young plants?
So I would say that that would be due to the interactions between the roots and the bacteria, which are very, very important and is very dynamic and hard to understand. But that was probably where that came from.
Do you know if organics, can they use Roundup? Like, I know they have rules to be organic. Can they use Roundup?
No, I don't think they can use any herbicides. Yes.
Do you know the effect that Roundup has on the soil health?
So it actually increases the amount of bacteria that's in the soil. So the actual soil isn't being affected in any way. The microbiome is increased. And then the greatest effects are in the plants that are in the soil and then the organisms that are in the soil.
Yes. Did you do any work that looked at glyphosate ending up in the water from these sprayed crops?
Yes, so the Monsanto Corporation claims that it'll be degraded in the soil before it reaches the water, but it actually is not typically, and it does get into the groundwater and then goes into lakes and rivers, and that's where it has the most effect.
Are we seeing it in municipal drinking water? Or do you know if anybody's doing that?
There are levels. The U.S. has a kind of level at which, you know, it's safe, or they consider safe. But yeah, it is found in our water supply. Yes.
Let's just say I'm not the devil.
Let's just say.
Is there something besides economic benefits? Is there something good to be said for the use of Roundup? I think, oh, there must be. Since we use Roundup, anything?
It could be used for like making your garden look nicer. I mean, the little native crops if that's not what you want. But besides that, it's really just commercial use. Yes.
So you showed several examples of how regular exposure to Roundup affects humans, but is there any correlation between like consuming crops that have been exposed to Roundup and like detrimental health effects from that, or is it just the exposure, direct exposure?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, so the case with Mr. Johnson, that was direct exposure, but the gestational lengths, that was due to the crops that were being eaten. So they looked at a lot of different lifestyles, variables, and they found that a higher caffeine intake and living in rural areas had those women had higher amounts of glyphosate in their urine. Yeah, and that was all ingested. It wasn't.
Dr. Quinn, would you like to come and say a few words about your student before presenting her with her stole?
I can tell you, I've had her in a couple of courses. I'd be happy to talk about it, but I don't want to take all day.
Certainly.
I was telling her yesterday as we were preparing for this, I have never seen such a good piece of research that required so little input by the mentoring faculty member. I'm like, really? Okay, tell me more. It's all on you. You did a wonderful job of your research, and you did it over a very long period of time. Didn't always work. It's one of the things you learn about science. It's like, oh, I got to start over, start over, start over. Persistence and quality of the work is outstanding. So congratulations.
Thank you all for coming.